Hi, I'm Ted Wolfe, presented by Guidewise. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, where we connect you to the stories and insights of people who have mastered implementation. Why? Because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. Join us as we uncover the secrets of successful implementation so you can conquer your implementation struggles. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, presented by Guidewise, where we focus on the topic of implementation because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. Today, my guest is Dr. Michelle Maidenberg. Dr. Maidenberg is the author of a book called ACE, A-C-E, Your Life. Highly recommended. We'll talk in detail on that. But she's also the president of a nonprofit called Through My Eyes, and we'd like to explore and talk about that in this podcast episode also. So, Dr. Michelle Maidenberg, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Maidenberg, tell us about your origin story. Tell us how you finally found your journey leading you into your present work, therapy, and being an author.
Yeah, it's been a journey. I feel like I'm still on a journey because I do a lot of things, but everything I do is from real passion. I have to say, like, I am one of those people who's happy to wake up in the morning because,
Good for you.
I hope everyone feels that way. I truly do. I have a private practice, and I think, I've been thinking a lot about, like, why did I choose this profession? What led me here? And that's, I think, the question you're asking. I grew up with 4 grandparents that were all Holocaust survivors, and they were in concentration camps, and most of their families were murdered, unfortunately, in gas chambers. And I didn't realize it until recently, but one of my grandmothers in particular, and they all died at like old ages, in their 90s, which is unbelievable. But one grandmother in particular used to tell stories about the war in detail. And, I think about now, like, hearing these stories at like 8 years old, 10 years old, like, gosh, what must have been going through my mind? I didn't realize, and I'm an empath by nature. And I could only imagine what I was absorbing during that time when she was telling me these stories. But I realized that I was feeling such great empathy and compassion for her. And, and just all the adversity and trauma that she experienced. And I think I took that with me. I literally feel like I knew that I wanted to do this since I was really young. I never wanted to do anything else, quite honestly. I also, I have to say that I was a little bit of a parentified child, through my life. So I was naturally the kind of person that people came to and gravitated toward, to have conversations and ask advice from. And I'll never forget when I was in high school, I won an award. I took an AP class in psychology and I won an award at graduation in psychology. And literally you would think I won an Academy Award. I was so excited. I was like, I had that medal and I was like, yay, So this is just like part of like who I am. I used to also think anyone could do this. Why am I special? Who cares? I actually think differently today because it does take a lot of creativity and skill and connection and, that not everybody, obviously has. So I've done a lot of education, like you said. And I do have advanced training in many, many different theoretical frameworks. So that's helped me to really hone in. Every time I feel like that I have an absence or kind of a skill that I need in order to do kind of good therapy, then I'll do some kind of, workshop or, continuing education to really improve my skills. That's like, I'm definitely one of those people who considers themselves a perpetual student.
Okay, so you mentioned just briefly in listening to the stories of your 4 grandparents, the trauma that they went through, the things that they experienced, that had to hit an emotional nerve with you. Why did you choose to go into your line of business? Is it that you like deciphering puzzles? Is it rather, though, that you would want to just help people and thinking of your grandparents? What's the why behind going into your profession?
Yeah, I love that question. I think it's twofold. I think it was I want to help people,
Okay.
full stop. And this is a good way to do it. I think also, and I remember initially, my parents divorced when I was 3 years old. And I had a pretty, like, my childhood was full of adversity in so many forms. And I remember that I wanted to help families. I wanted, to truly help them on a really deep level. And I think because of my own adversity and because of my own pain, I mean, I remember, I'm obviously doing my own therapy now, but I remember sometimes just sitting in such distress because I felt like there was no one to hear me and validate me and attune to me. And I was like, I don't want anyone to feel the way I do, so it really came from that place of wanting to help others.
So in effect, you're taking your lessons in painting, turning them hopefully into pleasure for other people. And that drives an awful lot of businesses. That drives a lot of
Yeah.
entrepreneurs. I was poor when I was young. I'm not going to let my family go through what I had to grow up, et cetera, et cetera. So if we
Yes.
take a look at your book, Ace, which is an excellent book, it's very, very good. My compliments.
Thank you.
When you start out in the very beginning in chapter 1, you talk about how the mind works. You give an overview. Could you give us a brief overview now on how the mind works?
Yeah. So I did a TED talk a couple of years ago on circumventing emotional avoidance. And that's really what I talk about. What people don't realize, and it is so important, that first chapter is so pivotal to understand how our mind works. The neurophysiology of our brain and how our brain is structured, again, is so, so important. Our mind it's reptilian. Our mind is wired to basically protect us from danger and discomfort. That that is how it's wired. And when I say it's wired, that is what we're always striving for. Now, when I say the word danger, we're talking about threat. We're talking about perceived danger. So sometimes our mind tricks us into believing something's dangerous and it actually isn't, because it could be from our prior experience. It could be on how we're socialized. It could be on a variety of different factors. So we can't believe everything that we think. And we also have this idea. And if you look on social media, I see this all the time and it leads to so much anxiety and distress. There's this idea that we could change thoughts and feelings. That again is a myth. We cannot change thoughts and feelings. The only thing that we could change is behavior. And just sharing that information with people, I have to tell you, is such a relief to people who suffer, because people have thoughts about their thoughts, feelings about their feelings, thoughts about their feelings, and feelings about their thoughts. Literally, that's what goes on through our mind. And by the way, no one is unscathed. If you're a human being, and it's, by the way, it cuts across every single race, religion, you know, socioeconomic status, etc. It does. Because we're human beings. Now, what's interesting, if you think about our brain also, right? When we look at our PCs, for example, and I'm always marveling, I'm like, how does my computer do this? Like, and when we update software, it does even more things. I'm like, what? Like trying to understand the technology behind it. I'm fascinated, but our brain works the same way, right? Because if you think about how sophisticated we are, we're not. The only thing that our brain computes is basically the same kind of way that our PC works. We have to update software. That is how our brain works, in the same exact way. Whatever we input into our brain is what we get out of it. So that's why, when we're younger, we have these neural pathways that get formed. And it is so difficult as we, right, have our adaptations and as we have our coping skills to change that as we get older, because our brain is still focused on how it needs to protect us in the past. And by the way, that has benefited us. So try to give that up as an adult. Pretty hard to do.
Mhm.
We resist. There's a lot of resistance that happens.
So I have two questions, if I may,
Yeah.
and I want you to correct me. I've heard this, and I want you to explain
Sure.
some of the details behind it. But you mentioned that the reptilian brain section of our mind. I
Yeah.
have been I have read and been told that the reptilian part of our brain is the emotions, and in treating trauma, that's where the first stimuli goes, to the reptilian. So emotionally, we feel it, and it
Yes,
may take a split second or millimeters, but then it goes to the frontal cortex, which is the reasoning mind. Is
that's
that
right.
accurate?
That is very accurate. And I think what you're talking about is our amygdala. That's the part of the brain,
Okay.
right? That's
So,
the feeling center of our brain. Yeah.
okay.
Just one more piece to add to that is when we have those memories, okay, let's say the stressful, the distressing, the traumatic, it's fragmented. It's fragmented in time. So there is no integration. And that's why you need healing,
Hmm.
because it needs the integration so that you're not relaying or associating the same type of, whether it's symptoms or body sensations or behavior that you did in your formative past. Now, think about this. Why does our minds hold on to these memories? To protect us.
Mhm.
It wants to remember forever and ever that this happened to us, so it never happens again.
So our job then is to figure out what behaviors do we need so we can react accordingly.
Yes.
Now, if I go to the reacting part, when I was young, my mother used to say, Teddy, take a deep breath before you respond. How would that fit in with what you just described?
So that's a very smart mother, by the way. And what she was doing, which she probably didn't know, but she was doing mindfulness with you. That's a mindfulness
Okay.
activity that you just
Okay.
described. It's creating space between the thinking and the doing. That's what she did. Because when we're reactive from our amygdala, which is our thinking, our feeling center, it's absent of the prefrontal cortex, which is our executive functioning processing center. Okay. And that's not a good place to react from. We don't want to react from our thoughts and feelings. We want to react from our values. And that's what I teach. That's my second chapter, right?
Yes.
So it gets literally fragmented, and we need to work on that. So when your mom was creating the space, she was giving enough time for the prefrontal cortex to get online so that you could then process with your executive functioning brain, your wise mind.
So I guess that's why Abe Lincoln used to put a letter on his bureau and wait until the next day to send it. Pretty smart. Pretty smart.
Yeah.
My second question, you mentioned that, and I'm not sure I'm going to paraphrase this correctly, but I believe you said we need to upgrade our brain's software.
Yes.
How do we do that?
Well, there's, because of advanced technology, which is amazing, is we have MRIs now. So there's been thousands of studies that show that when we do mindfulness and meditative practice, it replenishes the gray matter in our brain. We actually see the structure of our brain changing. Now, do you know how fascinating that is?
Yeah,
There
it is.
isn't there isn't any other way of changing the structure of your brain except for doing this. And why do we need to replenish the gray matter? Who cares? Yes, we do need to, because that is what gets depleted as we age. And that impacts our memory. It impacts our ability to focus. It impacts our ability to be present in the present moment. And I could go on and on. There's health benefits, and there's so many benefits.
What I'd like to do now is transition into your book, ACE,
Uh,
ACE. And I want to do that with a question, if I can,
Of course.
relative to business people.
Yes.
There's a lot of uncertainty in the business world today. Uh, we have technology that is relentlessly changing everything every single year. New
Mhm.
investments, new learnings, et cetera, new ways of doing business that you have to do. Change, fierce. Disruptions, nonstop. So, using the foundation of your book and the introduction in chapter 1 about how the mind works,
Mhm.
when we're faced with all of this angst and the uncertainty from home and work, whether you're the business owner, a business leader, or you're working in that great middle, which is the management, which really makes the business work, that's the golden part for the most part, in our opinion. How does that all set up? I mean, what knowing how your brain works, how can a business person apply that to their job?
I work with many business, people in business, people in small business, people who, again, own their own business, people who are in, huge organizations. I love working with people in business because a lot of it is predicated on relationships and relationship building and team building and otherwise. Just this past week, I had an individual who I saw in the past, and he, again, doing wonderfully. He actually, he ended up, because of our work together, he ended up getting an MBA. He's in, hedge fund, also investment banking. He, kind of does a whole bunch of different things. Well, he's looking now to change jobs. Okay. And he has a choice between two jobs, and they're very reputable companies. Mm-hmm. And he's torn. He doesn't know what to do. And he's angsting, such tremendous anxiety. So that's the kind of person I would work with. How do we make this decision? What's important to you? And I did this again, so from his thoughts and feelings and his gut reaction, he was really prompted to gravitate towards a certain job. But when I was able to tease out with him, okay, the most important elements of what he's looking for, both advancing his career and also advancing himself personally, okay, we were able to really weed out what would be best for him and what would lead into his higher order values. And that's where the magic happened for him. So I find generally I get asked mostly with people in business, the challenges I find mostly is relationship oriented, I have to say. Yeah, I do. That comes up a lot. So I help people like a lot with that. The same skills I also apply to parenting, for example. The other thing that I find, which is also remarkable and understandable, is we are not unidimensional. We're multidimensional people. So people, that means we have different parts to ourselves. Okay. And somebody could be extremely competent and effective and have extreme confidence in their career, but they go home and what's waiting for them? Gosh, they stay in the office far more hours than they need to work because they don't want to step in their door at night. And you're laughing because there's many people out there. I know. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And the opposite. I have some people who really, really feel like they're misunderstood, feel like, that it's hard for them to express themselves and communicate in an effective way. And I could go on and on. Some people who are anxious about how they're coming across and the impression they're making, to their team. Leadership. I work a lot with leaders, because there's all different types of leadership. So there's, it applies in so many vast ways. I cannot even tell you.
Thoughts and feelings are really prime in triggering behaviors, making decisions, evaluations. Business people every day have to deal with that. And then you talked about relationships. Trustworthy teams is what every organization wants to build, but they don't know how. Let's talk now about values. How do they interplay within individuals' behavior and trying to implement change, but they just can't get it implemented?
So it's the cornerstone of really decision making. It is. It is. And I do my work is predicated on values. Most people, both in business and otherwise in their personal lives, they try to convince me that they know what their values are. They know what their higher order values are. And then when we get into it, because I do exercises to extrapolate what that is, it's amazing. People are like, oh, because what we get into is understanding, a little bit better. Sorry about that. What we understand a little bit better is both, what is important to the person, and if it is important to them, how are they defining that for themselves? And what action do they need to take on a daily basis in order to lean into their values, right? It's also a more empowering way of looking at it, because instead of saying, right, a horrible boss or whatever, you say, you know what? I didn't have such a great boss moment, or I didn't have a great day. I was just off a little bit. I was a little bit offline. And I realized that I didn't take action to lean into my values in the way that I want to. And tomorrow, I'm going to make concerted effort to specifically lean into this value. So it is so much more empowering and motivating and confidence building.
Okay, I have two more questions, if I may. Number one, what's the difference between a belief and a value?
Good question. I love your questions.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So there is a difference. A belief is something that we hold, but I feel like it's more flexible. A value is something that we guide. It's a guide to action. We guide our behaviors and the way we live around our values. We don't guide our behaviors around our beliefs. So, for example, values have no contingencies. The hardest decisions to make are competing values. That's where we get stuck. It's not like we're comparing what we want to eat, vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream. That's an easy decision to make. It's higher order values that are competing one against the other. And we feel strangleholded and we don't feel like we could make a sound decision, or we have regret, or we have angst about making one decision over the other. Those are the meaty, juicy decisions. That value work could come in handy and could be so instrumental and helpful in helping us decipher. And that's the work that I did with that person that I spoke about earlier. So the other thing about values, when I talked about it not being, no contingencies, it's not, I have to, I'm going to focus or respect this value or lean into it if blank. No, this is what I do. This is how I live. This is how I breathe. This is how I take action all the time. And I'll give you like a quick example. Parenting always comes up, for me personally, because I'm a working mom. And it always happens that I'm conflicted, right? Between work and child responsibilities. It happens all the
Very
time.
common.
Yeah. And how many times, kind of, and it's particular for women, but happens with men as well. The guilt and the shame that comes up, it is overwhelming and it's distressing. But when I am distressed over this decision making, I handle it very differently. Okay. Number one, I try to think about these two. I try to think about and narrow in on which two values are competing. Once I've kind of understand that, I think about in this moment, which value has to take precedent. Not that one value is more important than the other. They're both equally important. That's why I'm distressed. And in this moment, which one needs to take precedent? And what also happens, which is beautiful, is what we do is we don't feel good about letting go of one value. So you know what we do? We avoid, we distract from even thinking about it because we're shameful. And we throw the baby out with the bathwater. So if I'm deciding, for example, that I'm going to do the career-driven decision because I need to, I say to myself, gosh, I'm really sad. I'm a good mom. This distress that I'm feeling, yay me, because I would not want to feel okay with this. That allows me to notice what a wonderful parent I am and how loving I am to my child. And on top of that, I am going to lean into that value as well. And I am going to pay attention to it, as difficult and as challenging as that is. And I'm going to make sure that I am doing whatever I can for my child to feel attuned to, loved, cared about, etc.
So you just mentioned that you have distress and the value says, I should be at home. I shouldn't be working. But then, correct me if I'm wrong, thoughts and beliefs came in and said, wait a minute, I'm glad I feel this way because it tells me the value I have, relationships with my children, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the interaction, I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, of beliefs or thoughts with values.
Yes.
Okay.
And the belief could be anything, by the way. Our belief could be, um, oh, I shouldn't feel guilty because, I need to support my family. And that's another way of being supportive to my kids. So I don't need to pay attention to the fact that I can't go to the playoff game. Yeah. I'm good.
Okay.
Now, that's a belief, right? Because my belief is based on, kind of how I was raised that, a good mom, let's say, supports her kids financially. I'm just making this up, but, my value is different. My value dictates that my parenting, and I have to define what I mean by parenting. It's not so easy to say parenting's a value, right? Or to say my career is my value. No, I have to really hone in on why that's important to me. So if I even think about career, let's say, okay, and I think about what values derive from that, even, I say to myself, it has to do with my confidence, my personal confidence. It has to do with my self-efficacy. It has to do with my role modeling. And there's so many things I could say. I could go on and on.
Then what is the difference between a goal and a value?
So there's goals and objectives. And so we have our value, let's say parenting. Our goal would be what the things that we do, the behaviors that we do in order to lean into parenting. So, and I would have a goal, a general goal, what that would be. And then I would have objectives, what I need to do, right? So it's kind of, the goal is the general, which we know. The objective is, more specific.
Okay. Okay. Um, am I correct that values very often are unconscious?
So there are values, there's three different levels of values, which I talk about. There are values that we acquire. There are values that we aspire, and there are values that are circumstantial. And that's how I break it up when I teach values. It's important to know about the differentiation between them because they're going to mean something different.
Okay, so let's use an example if we can to
Sure.
explain those. I own a business and I have to make a very tough decision, and my gut is just like wrenched over the whole thing. It could be I may have to lay people off, or I'm not going to get my line of credit renewed, or whatever it is, and I have some decisions I have to make.
Mhm.
How do those three different aspects of values play into that decision?
Well, so if I were working with you, I do this, again, I do a lot of forms and different worksheets and other things, which are very helpful. I would definitely do a worksheet with you, to differentiate between, again, depending on what decision you're making. It's hard to explain, but, I would do this first. I would do this form with you. And then what ends up happening when I'm doing this, form is I would derive from that what the kind of specific values are. And you would score it like 0 to 5, how important that is to you. So you yourself would establish and very visually see, and then there's a scoring. So you will actually see by numbers, it'll be weighted, which one is greater. Now, it's not only the greater number between the advantages and disadvantages, but it is also on top of that, which elements and parts of it are important. Because sometimes that information is even more important. Because that is what directly leads to your values so that you understand that better. So this particular person who I was talking about when I was doing this with him, what it came down to, for him is that, he really wanted a trajectory for his career. That was the most important element. We established that as we were kind of talking about it. And what value was that derived from? It came from confidence. Like that is what was formative for him for his building his confidence. Like he wanted to see incremental change and advancement. And him conceptualizing that and understanding that allowed him to really understand which job would lead him toward that.
Now, in going through the exercises you talked about, how does that lead to acceptance, which is your first A of ACE in your book?
Mhm.
How does that lead to acceptance?
So acceptance is not, the way we think about it, like, oh, I just have to accept, the way I am, right? Because that sounds, again, beautiful, but it's not realistic. And people are always scared it's going to lead to mediocrity. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. It's actually in the noticing. So it's really being able to face where you are at a given moment. And we don't have control over things as much as we'd like to. People in business, particularly, right? There's certain personalities, right? So people who are very driven tend to be more type A personality. Like that's just the way it is. And for people with that type of personality, control is very important. Sometimes micromanaging and other things get in the way of that. Okay. So, yeah. So understanding that about yourself and accepting that about yourself and accepting that you're going to have thoughts and feelings about that. You're not going to make decisions based on those thoughts and feelings. That's the whole point, because you're going to notice that your brain automatically goes to that space. Now, I'll give you another example that happened this week. So I'm working with somebody who is very successful. I mean, we're talking about highly, highly successful person. He again does private equity. I mean, we're talking about, major business. A lot of pressure, a lot of pressure. What happened was he inadvertently kind of said something to somebody, again, he supervises a lot of people. He inadvertently said something which he recognized afterwards wasn't kind of the best thing to say. It kind of slipped. And he is absolutely anxious and fearful about the fact that it's going to ruin his reputation in the field.
Mhm.
Okay. He's ridden with anxiety about it. Now, if you look on the surface and we just talk about it and we put the facts together, okay, and we tease it out, there really isn't a lot of evidence to prove that this person's reputation is at stake, quite honestly. And intellectually, he actually knows that because we've talked about it, but he can't sleep at night, literally. He's with his family and he has a little tiny baby. A toddler. He can't be present with her or his wife. And I could go on and on. And he's having these catastrophic thoughts and these racing and overthinking thoughts about what's going to happen to him. But guess what happened when we did deeper work and we talked about his values? It's not even about that. It led to a lot of other things in his past. It led to messages that were communicated to him by his father, who unfortunately died at a young age because of cancer. It led to being triggered because his brother is a failure and he's the successful one in his household. And when he thinks of himself and his reputation being ruined, I said to him, who comes to mind if you had a picture of what that looks like? And guess who it led back to? His brother. It's so complicated. It's so deep. It's so complicated. And I said to him, I said, that's great that you want to be so successful. And I am so happy for you and that you could never make a mistake. But do you see the pressure that you're living with and the havoc it's wreaking on your life? And I said, not for nothing, because I care about you. Your father died at a very young age because of a physical illness. And he also, by the way, he had a heart condition too. I said, you are barking up the wrong tree because you are putting yourself at risk. And I know how much you love your family. And I've seen many people die prematurely because of stress. So I need to tell you this. Yeah.
What you're explaining, I believe, then is a sequence of steps an individual can go through to process their values, their beliefs, et cetera, so that they can understand the meaning of what's going on. And then they can start the implementation phase. I mean, that's
Mhm.
the work of the implementation. So
Yes.
I believe, could you give us the proper definition of the word trauma as it relates to mental health?
Yeah, that's a tricky one
Okay.
because there's little T's and big T's. Okay. Um, in a nutshell, what happens is memories get fragmented and they don't integrate properly, like I said before. So when they're fragmented, we don't process them in our senses. How we think, again, in the way we see things, in the way we process things, in our interpretation of things, it gets distorted because of the fragmentation. And we make false associations too. That happens with big T's. It could be a single incident trauma, for example, God forbid, a rape or a car accident or whatever. It could be cumulative trauma. People have cumulative trauma over the course of their childhood or lifetime, whether it's being in a family where there was emotional abuse or verbal abuse or whatever. It could be also a single incident that happened over a course of somebody's lifetime. I mean, it's amazing what gets consolidated, what doesn't get consolidated in our brain. I spoke with a woman just last week, and the memory that sticks out that has affected her lifetime of confidence building is her mother saying something to her, that she recalls when she was a teenager. Literally, it sticks in her mind. And when she was talking about it, she started to be tearful as if it was happening today. That's how strong the memory was for her.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many people I see who have stories of, very like severe kind of circumstances that happen in relationships, right? Being bullied as a child or, a disruption in their childhood, or there's, again, I could go on and on. There's so many factors.
Okay. When you're in business, it's very easy, I believe, to look at some businesses and say they're hotbeds of trauma. Capital T,
Oh, yeah.
lowercase t, we'll say both. If an individual goes through trauma, they want to avoid that same experience as you described previously in our conversation earlier here. So let's say that I'm
Uh,
trying to make some big decisions
I'm
in
gonna, I'm gonna,
business.
I'm gonna stop you there.
Hmm?
That it's actually not avoiding. I'm gonna say the opposite.
Okay.
Yeah.
That trauma is not avoiding a previous
The
experience?
I'm gonna explain because I think this is a really important point.
Okay.
Because I think you said something like avoiding the triggers, right? Which could be trauma based.
Okay.
So triggers are treasures. Okay. Triggers is what helps us to understand what still needs healing. So the only way to heal and work on these is actually to lean into them, not to lean outside of them. Expose yourself to them.
Mm-hmm.
So if something's coming up in business, okay, that is, let's say, triggering, and triggering could mean a lot of different things, by the way. It could mean, like you said, a very hyperactive amygdala, which brings on feelings of distress. It could be a somatic feeling in your body. So we get triggered in our bodies. Sometimes people have heart palpitations or headaches, right? Or, sweats. There's all different kinds of things that happen, gastroenterological issues, like challenges that come up. So I would say that it's actually exposing yourself to the thing that you most fear. It's not avoiding it.
And is that where, and helping you to accept it, is that where EMDR treatment comes in?
Yeah. So I do something called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And actually, if you look behind me, there's a kind of a light bar back here. Um, so it's basically using bilateral stimulation. And I don't only use it for trauma. I use it for stuckness. I use it for impulse control. I use it for addiction. I use it again for so many different, you know, so many different things. Um, what we're doing with it is we are going into our senses. So when you're doing the bilateral stimulation, what I mean by that is, for example, tactile, touch. There's buzzers that have vibrations. There's the visual. So if you see there's little dots, there's like a stream of lights that go across the bar that one would follow. And that's visual. There's auditory. So there's all different modems that I use. I use two because usually it's too overstimulating to use more than two. What does that do? Why? How? What's the point? What it does is it gets deeper into our subconscious for whatever reason. We don't know why exactly, why that's the case. And also, it moves quicker. So I could tell you that when I did my training, I did a session in EMDR. And I think in that one session, I think it was accounted for like 2 years of therapy. And I'm not even kidding. Yeah, it was miraculous. And I see in my practice, just like the movement is just fascinating. So when we're doing it, it's not as much talk. It's more processing. And people tend to appreciate it because it's less evasive than kind of talking, because you're using this modem. It's interesting, just the other day. So just to let you know, I was feeling a little dysregulated. I was sitting in my office and, I ended session very late and I was feeling dysregulated. And I was sitting here and I was like, ugh, I literally need to just do something to really work on my nervous system because I don't want to walk out the door this way. I was feeling, there's a lot of stuff going on. Let's put it that way. And I sat here, I meditated first, and then I came up with a target and I decided that I was going to sit with my EMDR with the pulsars because it's hard to do it by yourself, otherwise. And I kind of identified a target and I worked on very specifically working on my nervous system. And it was great, you know? So it really helps. I use it also for relaxation. I use it for kind of working on our nervous system. I use it for trauma. I've done trauma work, unfortunately I've treated people again who've been in like severe car accidents, rapes, abuse. I had somebody who there was a robbery. I mean, they walked into a robbery in a store and, at gunpoint. So many different things that kind of come up. And then again, there's more complicated trauma that's, more cumulative over long periods of time. So like, instead of coming up with a specific target, when it's cumulative, it's very different because sometimes I won't do a target. I may do a target, like a memory of somebody, kind of an incident that stands out in their mind of that happening. Or I could also use some kind of somatic memory too. So when they get triggered, let's say, they find that they feel very shaky. Their body feels very restless and shaky. So I will do the processing on the shakiness. And it's amazing what happens because our brain is like branches. It kind of branches out. So sometimes when I go into the somatic part of it, it will branch into memories, specific memories. So it's a stylistic thing. I mean, you have to be trained, obviously. So there's so many different ways of, kind of approaching it, but it is absolutely literally, and just the science behind it, just so you know, when we experience a trauma, and we don't know why this is, but the information again gets fragmented, but it is actually stuck between the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. So when we have associations, right, it feels as if it's happening in the moment. Okay. And what the EMDR does and these other types of modalities is it unjimmies that memory so that you could process it and integrate it and recognize that it's not in the same place and time.
Okay.
Does that explain that?
Yes, yes. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
It sounds like it has a lot of application, not just one specific application.
So much. Yeah.
How does that help a person then to go through acceptance to get to the next stage, which is compassion?
So compassion, and compassion is a little briefer in some ways. What I do with each chapter is I talk about the barriers because, and by the way, it fills up a whole chapter, believe it or not. That's what we're contending with. I want you to understand how much we have working against us as human beings. When I work with people and when I did my research and, because what I believe when I write, the format and the structure of my writing is very, very specific. And I like to back everything up with research, and then I also like to talk about, some more innovative and creative things that I obviously help with. Um, but we never learn to be self-compassionate. We learn how to be compassionate towards others. That is how we're raised. That is how we're born.
Mm.
And that is so self-destructive because the only way that we make change is when we feel empowered, is when we feel self-compassionate. So how does that work? How are we expected as human beings to make change if we don't learn how to be self-compassionate? Now, an example is we used to think, which is a fallacy. We used to think that if we I can't think of the word, exercise tough love, that is going to move the needle and get people to behave differently. Guess what we found? It's the opposite. If you break people down, why would they make change? Because then they don't feel confident and competent in their ability to make change or to sustain change. If I feel great self-efficacy and self-love and self-compassion, that is when I'm going to make change because I believe in my worthiness. I believe in my self-respect. Believe in my authenticity. That is when I'm going to make change. So it is literally the fundamentals. And there are so many barriers to why we're not self-compassionate. I cannot even tell you. We need to know what those are because they're thrown at us all the time. And by the way, going into empowerment, same thing. We don't know how to sustain change. We know how to make change. We don't know how to sustain change. In the past year, there's been numerous books on habit formation and habit change. You might have read some of them. They're amazing, by the way. I highly recommend them. I love them. And I read all of them. But one of the things that I find is missing in these books is the sustainability. Because that's where we get caught up. And guess what? That's not behavioral. That's psychological. Like I almost want to, it is psychological. It is. And if you don't understand that, you're gonna slip and fall. And I call it slipping and falling, slipping and falling. That's what we do until we got it down pat. So that's what I teach people to do. We don't want like temporary change. We want long-term change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Your book seems to describe a nice process. Go through your values, understand how your brain works, go through your values, be able to identify what your blockage or your barriers are that you need to overcome, go through the acceptance, the compassion, and the empowerment. At the end of the day, it sounds like that's a dynamic formula that if we begin to rehearse it, it changes our brain and the way we live and behave.
Our mindset, our functioning, the way we view ourselves, our self-identity, so many different ways. I can't even tell you. Gosh, yeah.
I'd like you to comment on this example. I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. And as an example, I'm a business owner, business person. I got people working for me. I have some really tough decisions I have to make with the uncertainty. So I'm in flux. I need to go back and understand my values, recalibrate my values. I need to be able to go back then and be able to say, okay, how do I implement these things and do it in a way where I can accept, here's the facts of what's going on. If I can use that word facts loosely. I understand that. I begin to accept it. I start feeling compassion for those around me. I bring my values back in. I get to empowerment. I probably can make a better decision. Comment on that sequence that I just mentioned.
It's so interesting. You know what you did? Exactly what I said. You included compassion towards others. You didn't include compassion towards self.
Okay. Okay.
And I'm highlighting that because that's what we do. And we slip into that. So the decision making is actually the core of it is going to be really predicated on your self-compassion.
So it's the inner game, the inner world that I got to really focus on so I can be more comfortable with
You know,
outside of me.
you know why? Because not everyone's going to be happy with your decision. And it's not fail safe, because if it was, it would be an easy decision to make and you would not have distress over it. So it's also so it's saying to yourself, when I'm in these positions where I have to make such important decisions that affect people's lives and it affects the business, because that is so important to me, right? Productivity, accountability, whatever it is. When I'm in this position, it is so challenging for me. And it brings on such distress because I care so much. And because I care so much, there's pain and values and pain. And I'm going to feel pain right now. And I am willing to take that on because I care. Yeah. And the things that I need to do are whatever, and to figure that out. That's going to help you to actually implement the decision.
Okay. I'm going to change conversation topics a little. I want to go into your nonprofit now through my eyes. Tell us exactly what it is. What is the purpose, the mission, if you will, of that, in a little more detail as far as the day-to-day life of that particular
Sure.
organization?
Thank you for bringing it up, because it is such a passion of mine. It's a nonprofit, and it offers free clinically guided videotaping for chronically medically ill individuals who want to leave a video legacy for their children and loved ones. And it's an organization that I created about 10 years ago. And I've done over 300 videotapes. And what stands out about it, which makes it different than other organizations, is it offers videotaping for free. That's number one. Number two, at again, comfort at wherever anyone wants to be, because what I'm looking to do right now is to offer it remotely, which I've been doing. It also is conducted by a licensed mental health professional. So there's support, and I customize the questionnaire for each person. So there are different topics and topic areas that people want to cover. So it is specific and it is customized, and that is very important. So for all of those reasons, it really has been such an incredible therapeutic process, both for the families and individual who embarks, on this video legacy. What has happened is, in the past, the way that it was structured is we did fundraising, and basically the nonprofit would die with, if there was no fundraising. That's not a viable way to run a nonprofit. And what I've chosen to do, and we also used to do it locally and go to people's homes, and we used to have a videographer. It was a very different structure. What I'm looking to do now is to offer it nationally, and do it remotely, so that it could be offered more vastly for more people, and it's a seamless process. I'll give you an example. Just a couple of weeks ago, I did a video recording on somebody in remote, like Midwest, so remote that she did not have access to the internet. And she has 7 children, and she unfortunately is stage 4 cancer, and it's imminent. And she never would have done this if it wasn't for finding out about the service. And she had to go to her doctor's office in order to in order to use his PC and get internet connection. So that is the kind of people I want to reach. I want to reach everybody, whoever wants this, because everyone deserves it.
How long does a session like this take?
Typically, I would say, and again, everybody's different depending on what they want to talk about, and also the emotion, the kind of, some people are a little, people will sometimes say to me, I don't want to cry, So, they'll want to just answer certain questions. Some other people, really have extremely rich stories that they want to share about their childhood and upbringing and career and otherwise. I would say on the average about an hour and a half. Anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, but I would say generally speaking, it's usually like an hour to an hour and a half.
Okay. And they get the tape then, or do you
It's
distribute
it's
it
all
to?
it's again, everything's remote. Yeah, that's the beauty. It's forever.
Okay.
And you could also you could also share it, which is beautiful too. You could share it with family members. I had a person who did it and he wasn't ready to share it with his daughter yet because, he felt his daughter was a little young. So, he's going to share it with her whenever he feels comfortable doing that.
Good.
But he has it. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a very emotional experience, I'm sure, but
Oh,
also
it is. It is. I mean, listen,
unburdening.
the honor that I have to hear people's stories, it is so moving and it's incredible. Like I feel so honored. I cannot even tell you.
Yeah. Michelle, what you've been involved in a lot of different things. You read your book, you're tremendously well educated. It's a very, very good book, very thought provoking with some good exercises in it. Very, very good. You started your nonprofit. What lies in the future for you?
Gosh, I never stop. um, you know what? I first of all, I have an idea for a third book. And interestingly enough, it touched on something we spoke about, but I won't give it away. But I've done a lot of research and gosh, I mean, I can't even believe that it hasn't been tapped into more because it is
Okay,
a human.
you have to promise me you'll come back for
I
another
will.
podcast
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah. It's a human condition. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Okay.
Um, so yeah, so that I'm a perpetual student. As we speak, I'm doing a certification for another like theoretical framework. And I have two more that I'm like, aching to do.
Yeah.
I teach a course at NYU, so I'm always busy, with that. And I want to do that because it's such a passion of mine. I do guided meditations every Thursday morning on my YouTube channel. So I want to continue doing that, and I also blog for Psychology Today. So I try to get an article out, once every month or so. And I'm so proud because I'm up to 1.8 million readers.
Wow.
Which I have to tell you, like, I almost have tears in my eyes saying that to you because I write about topics that help people, like this last one that I just published was 15 ways to increase your confidence. So I'm always trying to write on either self-help or parenting, or I write about advocacy. I'm really a mental health advocacy. I wrote an article on school shootings and what we could do, in this country. So whatever I'm passionate about, I write about. And that is how I express myself and communicate, my love for people, literally. And that's how I feel. So whatever it is to help people, that's what I'm going to invest in.
Well, I think it's safe to say then your future wouldn't be dull and boring. That's for sure. So, what is the best way for individuals to contact you if they have questions and want to go into further, deeper conversations concerning the topics we talked about today?
My website is the best way. And it's my full name, Michelle, with two L's, Maidenberg, Maidenberg.com. It also has a quiz on there. So if you're interested in knowing what category of stuckness that you're in, you could take the quiz. So that's another thing that I invite you to do. But I am here. I'm always willing and happy to help. And yeah, whatever I could do to help.
Okay. I want to thank you for our conversation and time. It was very informative. I'd like to again mention the book, Ace Your Life, ACE, and again, your nonprofit, Through My Eyes. And I want to thank you for your time for a very, very, very informational, packed conversation today.
This is what the book looks like, just so you know.
Okay.
And also with the nonprofit, if anybody out there is willing to partner up, it could be an organization, it could be an individual, anybody who has passion, please reach out to me. I am open, literally, no ego. I want this to be successful. I want to help people. So I invite anybody who's interested.
Okay. Very good.
Thank
you for your time. I enjoyed the conversation very much.
Thank you, Ted.
Hi, Ted Wolf here. I want to thank you for joining us for this Implementors video. The Implementors podcast is presented by Guidewise, where we, along with our vetted member community, recognize that ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. To learn more about getting things done with Guidewise, please visit us at guidewise.io. And to conquer your implementation struggles, please like and share this video and subscribe to our channel. Happy implementing.